Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's special Common Council meeting. Roll call, please.
Fire. Paschal.
Here.
Rosendich.
Here.
Bargander.
Here.
Wagner.
Here.
Witzel.
Here.
Fisher.
Here.
Spiros. Here. Budke.
Here.
Hendler.
Here.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item number 3 is citizens' comments. Any comments from citizens? Any public comment? All right, we'll move on to item D, continued consideration of the recommended 2021 budget. Ed Wagner, Chairman of the Finance Budget Personnel Committee, presiding.
Thank you, Your Honor. I don't have any announcements to make tonight, but the order we're going to take things in is we're going to let Mr. Barg explain what the staff did with our request for cuts of a certain amount. And then we're going to go into deliberations and figure out if we can come out of here with a budget tonight. Steve, go ahead.
Sounds good. Thank you, I appreciate it. Well, yes, we started out, we ended the last meeting with sort of the directive from council to find $160,000 worth of cuts. And what you have in front of you does that. I probably will be saying a couple things slightly different than the sheet you have in front of you. Ron handed me a different one a minute ago that I'll touch on where there's a slight change, and I'll explain it. But, and I apologize for the representatives from District 4 and 5 who don't have this in front of you. So for Ken, I'm sorry, just 4, because as over there, for Ken, I'll be kind of reading this as I go. First of all, the first item is from the police, delay the purchase of 1 squad. I think you know that the police department always, replaces 3 squads every year as part of their program. And of course, those vehicles get hard use. But Pat Zepps believed that they could get by on just replacing 2 of the 3, that one of the vehicles would make it another year. So that's a savings of $43,333. And that is something that would be funded by debt through our capital projects 410 side of the accounting. Fire, we have a proposal to delay the hiring of a firefighter replacement till June 1st of 2021. That would save about $40,000. And the premise is more than just cost saving. There's an individual that has done some work for the fire department that they're very interested in, and they would like to be able to sign him on to the department, but he's still finishing up some of the courses and training he needs to do to be eligible for that. And that won't happen until the spring. So that would be kind of a win-win for the city and the department. Next up, and we'll get into more of this in a minute, but reductions to travel and training budgets, broadly speaking, is $12,159. And I do have a list of those if you want to go scrambling right through the day today, but about half of the departments that you saw the other day have come up with further cost savings in terms of some of their conferences, seminars, those types of things. Technology, the next one is delaying the spam filtering replacement 1 year from 2021 to 2022. That'd be $12,000. Streets would be delaying the replacement of number 5 pickup. That's $10,000. It was the 6th and final item on the 701, the internal service fund list that you saw last meeting. Then it's back to technology again to remove the technology intern position at $83.70. Next from streets is to remove the contract weed control that we pay for along Veterans Parkway. That's $8,000. Then from the library, leave 3 part-time positions vacant through 2021 that they would otherwise refill in this coming year. Just leave those vacant for $7,108 of savings. Next would be the emergency management, removing the Nixle 360-911 software program. I will say that this has been on the docket for 3 or 4 years now, and I've always pulled it because when it gets down to crunch time, it's difficult to make the budget work, but it's not a necessity for us. Next is from streets, remove contract crack sealing in the parking lots, unless you think that crack sealing is not going to occur in our parking lots. This is something that we would have our own staff do as they have time rather than paying a contractor to do that work in the city parking lots. So the work would continue. Development services, removing $5,000 for professional services. Josh oftentimes has an amount of money in there for what if you need to go out for a study or some kind of project where you need a consultant. And $5,000 may not go a long ways anyway. So the recommendation is to remove that. And certainly if something comes up where we need those kind of services, we'll likely look to you maybe through contingency or try to make it work some other way. But for now, there's nothing planned, so we would remove that. And then finally, the last one on the list from the police department, remove the Command Central subscription. And I think the council and the mayor, you get the Command Central reports, at least you've historically gotten them on Sunday nights. I don't think I've seen one for a little while, but that is sort of a summary of the crime statistics and some of those kind of numbers here in Marshfield to give you a sense of what's going on in the community for law enforcement. The total of those cuts is $161,089. Now, if you look down below that, about 2/3 of that is general fund reduction. And I think you know the difference, but we can touch on that in a minute. The other 53,333, which is delaying the purchase of one squad car and the delayed replacement of number 5 pickup truck for streets. Those are funded in other ways. The first one through debt and the second one through our internal service fund. So when you add this to the November 2nd revenue increases and expense cuts that we had, which is $189,673, that brings you to $297,429 of either increased revenue or expense reduction since we began this process a couple of weeks ago. There's one caveat to that, and that is that, Ron reminded me of this a minute ago. The Economic Development Board heard this request for the $25,000 transfer, annual transfer from that 205 Economic Development Fund to the general fund, and they weren't all that fond of it. I know that the Tom Butke and Adam Fisher sit on that board. There were concerns. I think they're somewhat wanting to make sure that the funds are there to do the projects that they do and hating to see it eroded. Sometimes people see that as a slippery slope. Today we want 25,000, next year what if we want 50, what if we want 100? And there's the thought that perhaps those monies could be dwindling over time and not able to do the projects that they spec out for the community. There was a comment made that maybe if we do this, we ought to, in the future, take it off the top from the dividend and then just give them the rest, so it's not like we're asking them to make a contribution. But I think by and large, there was hesitancy by this board to do that. And I'll turn it over to Adam. I know you wanted to make a few comments on this, Adam.
Thank you. Both Tom and I, as Steve said, sit on the Economic Development Board. And there was definitely a sense that I got that members of the board were not too terribly keen on the idea. But I made this point at EDB, and I'll make it again. I think, we contract with Mackey to provide economic development services for the city of Marshfield. And our own economic development director, Josh, who's done, in my opinion, a very good job, does a lot of work directly for the EDB. I think even the work that he and the mayor did on the grants that we gave out, he put a lot of time into that. That takes him away from city time that he could be investing in other areas. And so I feel strongly that EDB should give $25,000, even if it wasn't a bad budget season. I really do believe that to have something in place where we are taking out of the 205 fund and putting it back in the general fund, I think that's a wise move moving into the future. Now, whether we do it that way or, as Steve said, you take it off the top of the dividend before putting it in, to me, that's semantics. At the end of the day, we're still taking the money. So however we do it, I guess I don't have a preference, but I feel strongly that we should be allocating those funds into the general towards staff time. Thank you.
Steve.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'll let Tom talk a minute. I greatly appreciate Adam's comments, and I totally agree with him. I get, again, the slippery slope argument. And if I were on the EDB, I might be concerned that the city was going to come back asking for more money in the future, and then this was going to become a budget gap filler. But I think there's real good rationale for that contribution annually because of what we do on behalf of economic development.
Yeah, and I just want to state that Adam and I both, in some form, agreed that it should be done.
Any other comments on that subject? Steve, you need to proceed.
I'm going to turn over to Ron.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm going to turn over to Ron for just touching on the ISF. Oh, I'm sorry.
Adam, go ahead,
All right.
please.
I guess I would just like to, at this point, my question, Steve, is this, where is that right now? Is this not included?
I'm sorry, what?
The 25,000, did you remove that?
The 25,000 removed is in what I handed you tonight. Ron gave me an updated copy showing that, what if it wasn't? What if, in fact, the council didn't authorize that based upon the EDB's concerns? But what I've handed out reflects with the 25,000 added to the general fund.
And that would be in the 189,000 is what you're talking about? Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that if we approve these, that was in there. Thank you.
Correct.
Mr. Wetzel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Who pays Mackey? Is that EDB?
Yeah, it's the business development director position, and the EDB pays a portion of that, somewhere around 50%. I guess I haven't kept up on what it is, but it's paid through that dividend.
So it's not part of our budget at all?
No, it's not.
Thank you.
Did I see another hand over there? What about over here? Okay, if not, then proceed, Steve.
Yeah, I'll turn it over to Ron. He's going to touch on the ISF internal service fund issue for a minute, and then I'll pop back up.
Yep, just real briefly, because all these changes, I got to somehow input at some point. So I just want to read back what we had on the internal service fund. So the internal service fund to expend $105,000 for items in lieu of debt. And then just to clarify what that means for purchases. So out of the $650,000 they would typically expend, minus $105,000, minus the $10,000 on this sheet. So their 2021 purchases would be down to $535,000, just to clarify that part.
Okay, did you mention the total 2021 debt, or should I take that? I'll take that, okay. So then the total 2021 debt would be reduced by $148,333. This is not on the sheet that I gave you, but that would be the $105,000 that Ron just touched on, plus the squad car being taken out at $43,333. So the debt reduction from this scenario would be $148,333 less debt in 2021 that we would incur. The potential tax rate impact from all the changes you're looking at right now from these last couple of meetings would be approximately 2.1% or 20 cents. So that would be the opportunity you would have to modify the proposed tax rate increase. Again, we're not encouraging this by any means. We would love to see you stay at or very close to the 4.5% because we believe, Ron and I and others believe we need to be there in order to start getting ourselves out of the structural budget deficit that we have. But that you need to know that would be the potential impact from the savings that we're discussing on November 2nd and tonight. The travel and training budgets, just to kind of highlight, originally, and again, this is three categories: travel and training for department heads, staff, and then boards and commissions who sometimes go to training nearby for, whatever they need to keep up on what their roles are. Originally, it was just under $170,000, revised on November 2nd down to 118, and revised here to about 106. And as I mentioned, I'll touch on some of the decreases, which I apologize you don't have this list, but this is since the last meeting. Law enforcement, 1970, development services, 2,200, finance, 2,950, engineering administration, 1,380, city administrator, 500. Several parks and recreation departments kind of evenly divided there. So take theirs from 25% reduction in travel and training to 50%. So I'm not going to read all those individual ones. And there's a number of others. It comes out again to 12,159. So if you look at what I've got down at the bottom, this is something we've talked about before. What is a city required to do for certifications, recertifications, and licenses, those kind of things? And I threw in just a couple that are, in my opinion, are pretty much there, which is a couple things that the fire department does, where they have hazmat training, confined space training. I mean, we really need to do this. It's not legally required, but we provide those services, and we'd be in a world of hurt if we had to depend on other agencies to do those types of emergency responses for us. The total comes to about $51,000, actually a few dollars less than that, so I just rounded it. So that, in my opinion, is the amount, from what I've been able to calculate, that we need to do, period. So I admit, I'll be honest with you, the proposal you have is still above that. And I respect if you want to mandate additional cuts and say, look, Steve, cut this amount and find it. But I really looking through what the department heads have presented, asking them to go back a second time and dig through what they might be able to forego in order to help out the cause without causing, issues where they're not able to learn and grow in what they do. This is what we came up with. And now I'll take any questions.
I have a number of questions, but I'll let the committee go first. Mr. Wetzel, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I just kind of started 3 different items here. We don't currently have Nixle.
We have Nixle, but we don't have this reverse, and I think it's usually been called reverse 911. It's a system that has been proposed for, I think, 4 years now that we don't have.
Okay. So we never had it. It's not that we're cutting it, like we're going to lose it. We're just
No.
not adding it.
We use Nixle.
I was going to say, I'm signed up for Nixle through the county, so I didn't know how this was connected. All right. Then I have a couple questions, I guess, for the technology department. While you're heading to the podium there, 2 questions I have. What impact does the removal of the technology intern position have on your department? And the second question, delaying the spam filtering, does that make us vulnerable for anything, or is that just simply that we're going to end up with more junk in our email box?
So for question number 1, currently we do not have an intern. I mean, we did have one earlier this year, and given the situation with the pandemic and whatnot, and we do not have a nice place, an office space, because previously we were staffing the document processor and the intern in the same work area. And ever since the pandemic, we try to have each person, because we were sharing workstations. So ever since that intern left, we now have one workstation for each document processor. So outside of that, we do not have room, and we do not see this situation being mitigated anytime soon. So we decided that we can skip having intern for 2021.
Okay, thank you.
And then as for the spam filtering, I guess our current spam filtering still works. It's just that it's probably not as effective as a new one would be. Since we are looking for any cut, and then other cuts that I would offer up would be even much more severe. So this is what I consider somewhat less impactful if we were to go this route.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, if nobody else has anything right away. Steve, I want to talk about the firefighter position. Is that a joint firefighter paramedic position, or is that just firefighter, just with one or the other? Or is it both, you know?
Okay. Peter, you on the call?
I am.
I think Pete might be best to take that
Can you
question.
tell me, sir?
Yeah, so it's going to be a firefighter paramedic position.
Okay, and my biggest question is, delaying this until June, what does that do to your shift strength?
So obviously we'll be short-staffed, 1 member on 1 shift. Generally speaking, from January until April or May, there aren't a whole lot of vacation or paid holidays used during that time. So the hope is, with everything coming together, that, it won't have that much effect on us, put it that way.
What would you
Does that make
consider, okay, what would you consider, how many would you have to have sick or absent off that shift before it became critical?
3 would put us at our minimum staffing.
And could you call in other people on overtime on that rate?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct, but we're obviously trying to avoid that in order to not offset the cost savings here that we presented.
Okay. All right, thank you. The other, I don't have, okay, you answered the question about Command Central. An easy one here. You're cutting out contract weed control on the Parkway. And you're cutting out the contract, or are you cutting it all is it going to be done by city crews, or is it going to be just not done?
No, this would be done by, I'll let Chris explain.
I know Mr. Handler and Mr. Bucky wouldn't like this too much, but we do contract out, I think it's Central Cooperative, to put weed control on the boulevard in some of our detention basin areas that are highly visible. So you would get some dandelions and weed growth for a year until we got back on it.
You said for a year? Is that what you, did you repeat that? Because I can't hear you very well.
Well, I was hoping this was a one-time cut and then we'd come back next year and be able to put this in the budget, so. But
But
we
so you're
would,
saying it won't be mowed?
no, just the weed control, the application of the weed, the weed application.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I couldn't
herb or
understand what you
whatever
were
you go-
saying,
yeah.
so, all right. Okay, and one last, thank you, Chris. And I think this one is, can you tell me what the mill rate would be for debt service and what the mill rate would be for operations? And here's what I'm saying. We already know that we were talking about basically levying, I think, 45 cents, if I recall, for what, but that was what, in the budget?
43.
43. But Ron had a disagreement and felt that if we were going to cover the rest of our debt, we'd go 71, 77?
It was 81 at one point, but it's come down a little bit.
Yeah, I understood it was a 77 last time I heard it.
Yeah, that's correct. So what's in the proposed budget is a 4.5% increase to 997 to fully fund our debt. So with no change to what's being levied in the debt service right now, to fully fund our debt would be about 1025. And that would take care of the debt service part of it. And that's again allowable by levy limits. And then the general fund part of it, we're really restricted on how far that part could go up, but that would be about 2%.
So that's basically 2022 or 20?
The total?
The total 22, right?
So to add 19 cents, so 954, add 2% on top of, so 19 cents on top of the 1025. So our theoretical maximum would be about 1044. And again, this all has got to be run through about 6 different steps before we get down to it. But
and you figured the operations is like 997, right?
997?
Is that
No,
what you,
997 is what's in the proposed budget. And
Yeah.
the reason we set it there, so 1025 obviously solves our debt problem and avoids, every year that we're sending out tons and tons of cash.
okay, I got it.
997, we kind of are proposing with all the cuts that are being presented is kind of the tread water possibility. So I'm trying to keep track of all the cuts, but even at 997, the combined deficit between both funds would still be, about $1.1 million. And again, to go back to where it came from is, the biggest things that happened is our debt service increased by $750,000 due to flattening
Just
it.
what we budgeted just what we borrowed this year.
Correct. Part of it was flattening, part of it is borrowing for the pool. And then on the general fund side, we lost $150,000 of general transportation aids and about $100,000 in interest revenue. So right now with Steve's cut, general fund expenses are actually below last year by some 0.5% maybe.
So if we kept the mill rate the same but accepted the cuts that are in here, would that apply more to the debt service and reduce the amount that we would have to take from the general fund, the balance?
So you're asking, accept the cuts, no tax increase?
No. Basically, accept the cuts and keep the increase that we would have had. What I'm looking for is a way of reducing the amount that we're going to have to take from the general fund balance to cover the debt at the end of the year, because that's what we're going to have to do, right?
Correct.
$1.2 million, $1.20 million, something like that.
Correct.
Okay, so what I'm looking for is if we budget the same, if we accept the cut, but don't change the mill rate, does that give us more, does that reduce the amount we're gonna have to take out of the general fund at the end of the year?
When you say don't reduce the mill rate, what are you assuming the mill rate's when you say don't reduce it?
You've given me like 3 of them, take your pick.
So, all right, so let me answer it this way. So what we have proposed is a 4.5% levy increase. So that gives us a deficit of $1,160,000. And it doesn't matter which fund it is because that's the total. General fund's ultimately responsible for both. So that's at 4.5%. Now, if you reduce the levy, because we have a cash flow problem, every dollar you reduce the levy is just, you're making the hole bigger again. So if you cut out dollars of 100,000, reduce the levy by 100,000, the hole's still the same size. So dollar for dollar, that you reduce the levy, the deficit just gets bigger. From the 4.5, from that starting point of 4.5%, and all the cuts are in. Because we have two buckets and there's a hole in each bucket, so.
That just doesn't make sense to me. Tom, go ahead while I try and figure out.
Thank you. If we took the 4.5% increase that was proposed and we accepted the cuts that have been now proposed, how does that impact the horribleness that we're facing?
So that's where we have a deficit of $1,160,000 in that scenario. So that means so let me give you a couple points of reference. So that's true cash, that if it comes in on budget, will be $1.1 million in cash shorter. We're already in violation of our fund balance policy. Our credit downgrade was due to low cash, low fund balance. And then we're at a starting point of our next year deficit is $1,160,000.
So I guess what I'm confused by is,
I am too.
I think, I thought we were going into the budget that was proposed 4 meetings ago with a $1.16 million deficit. But now we're looking at reducing a fair amount, not tremendous, but a fair amount of money off of the expenses for the year. Doesn't that make our 1.16 million a little bit prettier, a little bit less?
What do we have for, let's see here.
I mean, if we're cutting 300,000, shouldn't that bring us down to less than $1 million?
297, 429.
I think we started at 1.4. And so now we have about $200,000 of general fund cuts. So my estimator, I come to $1,160,000.
Okay, so the 1.16 million is after the proposed cuts, maintaining the proposed mill rate increase.
Correct. And why all these numbers seem so large is if you look at last year's approved deficits in one time, it was at $1 million already. Then we add 750,000 to debt service. We lose 150,000 transportation aids, 100,000. So the gap in 1 year grew pretty substantially.
Okay, explain to me how we can spend less and raise the same amount of money as if we were spending more and still be in a bigger hole. That just doesn't make any sense.
Because our debt went up $750,000 and we lost $250,000 in revenue. It's all revenue side. That's lost revenue, well, partially lost revenue, increased debt expense.
Mayor, go ahead.
I'm completely confused.
Thank you.
I don't understand how you can go lower and make a bigger hole. So one thing I feel like what we're doing, and I don't know how the rest of you feel, although I appreciate what you guys have done, is I feel like if we're in a football game, we're looking at our first series of downs or maybe the first quarter. What I don't see here is the big picture, because what I don't want to do is for the next 5 years saying, well, that little issue that we had a while ago, we're still fixing it. So I think what needs to be I think what would help me for sure is what is it that you guys are requesting? Because these cuts are good. I think there's more, but these are good. And it's certainly what was asked. So that's good. But what is requested and the 43 cents going up, if some people would say, well, we just found 168,000, could we lower the rate? And I think we need to know from your expertise is how going down would be an issue for next year, and as well what our credit is. But what I'd like to see is what is the game plan for when we're going to be out of this? So we go up X amount this year, then how much are we left? Obviously, everything is going to change, the mill rate and all these other things. But where is the end so that we can know and we can look at for the next couple of years what we're up against?
Sure, and that's the tough question. So if we wanted to balance this year, we'd have to raise the rate to 10.25 and cut a total of $900,000 out of the general fund. That's what we'd need to balance our budget in total. And what I had said at one time, if you want a path back in 3 years, is we raise the rate this year, otherwise to the 1025. That pays our debt and avoids all the cash flow problem on that side. We have negative expenses in general fund, and then 2021 and 22, we work it back on the general fund. So even if we budget the cuts we have in 2021, we can still take proactive measures, delay hiring, and look at service cuts, because really that's all that's left. I mean, we can talk all night about how much training people should have, but it doesn't move the needle in the big picture. So that's a 3-year path back. So 4.5% we thought would be the fight another day scenario. It doesn't fix the problem, but it doesn't make the problem substantially worse. And we can kind of see a series of years of the same thing, where we'd have to keep doing the same thing to get back.
So
You go ahead.
hypothetically, just a quick follow-up to that, then if we go up to what you're suggesting and we go to 997, then we're if you want to solve the problem, at least for as far as the information that we have right now, you're baking in a tax increase next year to go up 28 cents to get to that 1025. Is that correct? And then once we get to that 1025, now we theoretically should be stable.
So that's one side of it. So at some point, again, we can't predict the future. We don't know how it's going to turn out. And if you'd assume our debt is completely flat, at some point our tax rate has to be 1025 to pay our debt. Either we do it in slow, painful parts, or we do it at first. That solves the debt problem that we've had, and now we still have. General fund's a different story, which I kind of try to keep the two narratives separate. General fund, we can start at the top, the biggest budgets in 2021, police, fire, streets, how do we want to resize this? But the debt part's not going away, because those are on a schedule and those are hard payments. The general fund to me is a soft deficit, because we can take actions during the year or work it down.
The 1025 also makes an assumption that we don't borrow anything and add to it.
Not necessarily. So
Okay,
if
that's good.
So think of it this way, and this is, I'm trying to talk in really broad terms here. If what it would take to 1025 for our debt, and our debt's flat, and we embark on a process where we borrow a little bit less than we pay off every year, then we start tipping that line down. So if you assume it's completely flat, it's not. But once we get to 1025, that should take care of our debt side, hopefully, especially if we're borrowing less than we pay off, and we can tip it down.
And to some extent, I'm on the mayor's side on this one. Okay, forgive me for that. All right. But the thing that I feel almost unconscionable is for us to walk away from this budget with the problems still intact. I really do. I think that's unconscionable. The thing is that the way I've always looked at the total levy, the total levy was that it consisted of two elements, and that was the operations and the debt service. Actually, there were 5 of them in there, I think, 5 or 6 elements in it, if I'm reading your financial report correct. But the point is that we're going to be raising it to 1025 would be a tremendous burden on the taxpayer. But it's something that's got to be done. And the thing is, we have this anomaly in the law. Are you listening?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We have this anomaly in the law that says that we can levy our way out of debt, but we can't do it for operations.
True.
So the more we levy for the debt, the better we are at paying it off or stabilizing it at least. But at the same time, we have to do something about the operations part, because that's going to eat the taxpayers alive. So basically what I'd say is what my preference would be 1025 and accept their cuts. Mr. Bell, let's see, Wessel.
Thank you. Again, I go back to a comment I made last budget meeting. It took us 10 to 20 years to dig this hole. I have a hard time saying that in 1 year we're going to fix it. But what I'm encouraged by, this is, if I had a graph, it would be really cool. I like pictures.
I always want a whiteboard in here.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
if what I'm understanding you're saying, okay, and I don't know what the numbers are, but we have a certain amount of debt, and over the course of the next year, we're going to pay down some of that debt. As long as our borrowing for the following year does not exceed the amount we paid down, everything stays flat. But if we can borrow less than we're paying off, which is what everybody should want to do in their personal lives, then that makes our payments, required payments less, which brings us out of the hole more quickly. So I would really have a hard time. I understand there's going to be a tax increase, as much as I hate to see it happen during a pandemic. But I don't think that we can fully fund everything. What I want to see us do is to begin to rectify. I mean, we're driving a big, huge ship down. They don't turn on a dime. We can't just suddenly say, okay, we're good, and it's too much. But if we can get things moving in the right direction, I think that's what we need to look at. So I would really, really have a hard time going to 1025.
Okay.
10 years to get there, at least. If we can get back in 3, 4, hey.
Before Ron responds, I think, I understand, I was in Mr. Wetzel's camp mentally for a long time of this. But the problem I've got with it is that if we don't do this, we're going to be taking money out of the general fund balance, we're going to be depleting it. It's going to kill our bond ratings for what we do in the future. And it's probably going to, it might at some time, if that thing is drawn down low enough, it will mean that because of our cash flow, the way our cash flow is, we get most of our revenues in February and another chunk in October, or September, October. And basically there's that gap in the middle. Someday that fund is going to be down so low that we won't have the cash flow that we're doing, and we're going to be borrowing short term. And that's, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. So that's why that's the only objection I have to Mr. Wetzel's otherwise brilliant idea. Mr. Butke.
If we would go with the 10 to get out of this mess, what does that mean to the taxpayer on a $100,000 house? What would that go up on their bill?
So
roughly.
We'd go from 954 to 1025, so 71 cents per thousand. On our part, which I think the school is actually going down. So 71, or is that $71 per?
For a $100,000 house. Mr. Mayor.
So I just think that the plan, I just wish it was clear, because there's a big difference when you go to the dentist and you have a cavity filled as opposed to a abscessed root canal. And I don't think that we're really clear on the fact that this is that abscessed root canal or worse, which is why that plan is so important. Nobody wants to go up 70 cents, but you do understand that if you don't, we're still doing this. But to Mr. Witzel's point, could we do it in a step situation of, so that the public knows, okay, this year we're going up this month, next year, because we just don't want to be doing this for 5 years of we're just going to keep going up. When do we get it under control?
So, again, if we fix, you never know. I mean, you never know what the future holds. 2022, I expect our state aids will get hammered from the state. But to me, the 3-year is fix the debt. I mean, I know it's such a large increase, but the reason it's such a large increase is because we had all those years what it should have gone up. Average comes out to 1.4% a year or something. So the plan to me is, if you can fund the debt in this year, that stops the bleeding on our cash side. These cuts, and then in 2021, so say, I don't have the exact number, we have an $800,000 deficit in the general fund this year. Next year, we commit to $400,000, cut that in half again. And then, 2022, we'd hope we'd be back, 2023 budget, I hope we'd be back to balance. And going forward, then we'd probably want to put some kind of policy or, procedure in place not to, apply fund balance quite as liberally as we have in the past, even though it's unknowingly at times.
Mr. Bucky?
Ron, microphone. Good thing I have you, Tom, to help me. So for the taxpayers to know, and so we know, on a $100,000 house, what are they paying now, and what will they be paying? We know it's going to be $71 more.
Correct. So I'm just talking about the city. The city side is 954.
Yes.
So, I can't.
Roughly, I'm not trying to hold.
So 954, I
It'd be
don't know where my decimal is there for.
Be $954.
The money man.
So $954 for the city portion. And then at 1025 would be $1,025. So $71 per $100,000.
Okay.
And again, you know, what I get a fair amount of calls too from citizens on these kind of things to explain the things they're hearing at these meetings. And I constantly tell them it's no new spending. I mean, it's our existing debt and actually now a decrease in general fund expenses. So it's not like we're have any, to me, excessive expenditures. Obviously, you can cut some individual things out if you see them, but it's not new spending. It's our existing spending and our existing debt.
Mr. Bucky?
And if I could, Ron, what are we proposing projects for next year that would go to debt? How much would that?
It was 299,000 if I recall.
So, yep, I think I heard Ed quoted there. We had $2,991,000 on our borrowing list, and now we've knocked off about $150,000. In your packet somewhere, I can bring it up here in a second here. And Dan can probably tell you off the top of his head, but let me find it here. So the major items we have, just looking through the debt list, we have 1.7 million. So 2.7 million, largely it's all street projects. Lincoln Avenue, Fifth Adler, asphalt street surface and mill in place, surfacing mill in place, annual seal coat and crack filling, stormwater, that one ISF's picking up. Becker Maple, Cedar Storm Sewer Reconstruct. So it's largely, almost entirely street projects there with a little dribbling of a couple other things.
So what would it mean, and this is very hard for me to say, if we wouldn't have that, if we weren't spending that next year, what would that mean for getting us closer to where we have to be?
So all our future debt is a long-term solution.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll do those projects in 2021. We borrow and pay for it over 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you cut something like $100,000.
You're not getting it every year.
Right, yep, it's just $5,000 a year.
I sort of wanted to hear that.
Yep, so that's why the borrow less strategy is a slow strategy, so once we get there, we can start tipping it down and be real conscientious about how much our new borrowing is.
Anybody?
Yeah. Thank you. I just want to say that, if we go back to the beginning of the process, from the first time Ron and I met and talked about the budget, he said, I recommend 8% increase in the tax rate, that we fully fund that 1025, I think at the time was 1031. And it was me who said, that's not going to be politically palatable. I just don't believe it is. So what I want to do is make progress. I want to start charting a longer term course. One of the great things that this body did a couple months ago was agreed to defer the East 17th project over by the fairgrounds by 1 year to 2022. That brought our borrowing down to just a few dollars under $3 million, which has never happened since I've been here. And it's less than the 5-year financial plan we have with Ellers suggested that we have for borrowing. So, if we can keep that more in check, that's part of the process as well. I realize it's a long-term strategy. I know the council is looking at, and the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee has requested that they review every hiring before it takes place, refilling a position. I guess what I'm saying is, I'm not trying to minimize where we are now because I fully agree with Ron, but I think that whatever tax rate increase you come up with, and if it's more than 4.5, wonderful. I never pictured that happening. We have to be committed to this on a long-term strategy. I know what you're saying, Mayor, about what's it going to be 3 years or, how's it going to get there? I don't think we have all the answers, but, we're catching up. I think Mr. Witzel said it. We didn't get here in 1 year or 2 years. We got here in a period of years, and it's going to take a little while to work our way to a better place.
What's your pleasure? This is the quietest I've ever heard you guys. Mr. Bucky?
Not for sure, but you may be able to twist my arm for 4.5 increase.
The 4.5 is the one with the 71 cent increase?
No.
Oh.
That would have been the,
997 would be the new rate.
Mr. Wetzel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we have any feel for what's happening in neighboring communities? I know that when this first came out, we didn't have any clue what Wausau, Point Rapids were looking at. Do we have any idea now?
We haven't looked, and I think our situation is kind of unique. I did look to see how they're doing. I just looked at their credit rating, their last audit report, but they don't have the issues we do.
Where were they at when we started? We were the lowest. Where were they at in comparison to us?
So compared to last year, I haven't seen what they had last year. I thought we needed, so we were at 954, and I think the next lowest of our neighbors was 1004, and Rapids is over $12 per thousand.
Thank you.
And Wausau was, I think, 1049. To answer your question, last year, I think all three of them came in at like 2 to 2.5% increase. And again, they're not facing any particular structural deficit I'm aware of like ours, but they were in that cost of living type range.
I was on a conference call with a group of county board chairmen from our 9-county region, and 3 of them said over there that they were suffering with a structural deficit. Surprise, it's out there. It's not as uncommon as you think. It's happening out there, and tomorrow morning we'll be dealing with a small one at county also. But I've seen this. The other thing, I'm going to let that go. Mr. Bucky, go ahead.
yeah, to Mr. Mike's on, to Mr. Witzel's comment, it would be nice to know what they're looking at for an increase to be able to sell this. I guess, that part would help. So if we could get any information on that, maybe, I'm trying to justify the 4.5%, and I'm struggling with it, but if other communities are looking at that, it's easier to sell.
Mr. Paschal, we hear from the left side over there, finally.
Thank you. Been a lot of talk about training in this budget process. As you know, I was a former city employee. I took advantage of some of the training that was offered. Some of the best training I had was a course called Leadership in Police Organizations. Sergeant Jim Hiller and I were the 2 first officers to go to that. Excellent training. I think that probably most of the police department has attended it. I know that it was so good that we hosted a couple of sessions of that training here in Marshfield and invited other groups to come here. Much of that training, that was a 3-week training class, so it was quite a bit more than the 24 hours that I needed to keep my certification that year. And much of that training was dedicated to problem solving. Identifying problems, looking for the chain of events that led up to that problem, identifying the root cause of the problem, and using ethical decision-making to create a plan of action to solve the problem. We've got a problem here. Much of the work has been done by our city staff to solve that problem. They've looked at the events, they've found the root cause of the problem, and they've identified a plan to help start solving this problem. It's up to us now to take the difficult step to implement that plan. None of us want to raise taxes. I think we've cut as much as we can cut. I think it's time that we decide on following their plan or digging ourselves deeper into the hole. Thank you.
Ms. Spiros?
Thank you. For clarification purposes, I know last budget meeting, we talked about finding these cuts, and then, I don't know, there was mention about the step raise, and now I'm confused. What are we doing with the step raise?
I believe they're currently in the budget.
Yes, they are.
That's all I had.
Mayor?
So if I could just ask for clarification, is what you're asking for to, with the original budget, accept your cuts here and accept the 4.5 increase in the taxes? Is that what your request is?
Correct.
And the other changes that were made last meeting, you know, which you went through those with travel and training and some odds and ends, those two together, which came up to just short of $300,000 in adjustments between revenue and expense.
And absolutely to consider, you know, doing more, you know, at 4.5, again, that eats through 37% of our 2019 unassigned fund balance, and almost exceeds the cash we had in the general fund at the end of 2019.
Thank you.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
I'm willing to make a motion to that effect, a 4.5% increase with the cuts that have been made.
Is there a second? Second by Mr. Handler. Open for discussion. Mr. Witzel?
Is it enough? That's my only concern. Is it enough? You know, our administrator says, let's keep it conservative, and I appreciate that. Our finance director says they ain't gonna cut it.
It's a continuum. I mean, at 4.5%, that's the tread water option. We, you know, if we're a business, we lose $1.1 million in 2021 if we come on the budget.
So 4.5% basically kicks the can down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any further discussion? I can't support this for the same reason. It's kicking the can down the road. This thing is like an open wound. Ever since I thought about getting back on this council, I've been watching you guys on TV. I've been watching you struggle with this, and it's $1 million here and 700,000 there and 600,000 here, and this fund, you'll only get a deficit of 1.2 million. You know, I was on a local non-government organization board not too long ago, and they gave us their annual budget, and they said, "Oh, look, we'll only lose $105,000 next year." And I went through the ceiling. You know, you don't budget to lose money in government. You don't. And this tomorrow is another day. This Gone with the Wind, Scarlett O'Hara thing that will, you know, we'll take care of a little bit of it now. We'll take care of the rest of it in the future. I just can't go with it. I mean, I've watched you guys bleed on this for over 2 years. And it's time to end it. It really is. So anyway, is there any other discussion? If not, the motion on the floor, Deb, can you read the motion, please?
The motion is to approve the recommended 2021 budget with a 4.5% increase with the recommended reductions over the past 2 meetings.
If you're ready for the vote, will you call the roll?
Fire,
No.
Paschal,
Yes.
Rosendich,
No.
Bargander,
Yes.
Wagner,
No.
Witzel,
No.
Fisher,
No.
Spiros,
No.
Budke,
No.
Handler.
What's the count?
3-7. Motion failed, 3-7.
Motion fails 3-7. The floor is open for motions. Would you like a 5-minute recess?
Yes.
The chair will declare a 5-minute recess. Keep the cameras and the mics on. Okay, we're back in session. And we had time to think about this a little bit. Does anybody have any suggestions? I'm feeling pretty good. I can probably stand here all night.
Oh, were you standing? That's your lane.
Yeah, you did. Okay, here's the thing, only thing, I have to share with you is something I think I shared with you earlier, but I want to emphasize it. We have levy limit. We have how much we can levy for operation. That's that part of it. But for the debt service, we can levy for whatever our debt actually is. That's a strange quirk in the state statutes, but it is a loophole that we might be able to use so that we can start building up our cash reserves again. And we're going to need those cash reserves. There are expenses that come up. Everybody knows. There's nobody in this room who doesn't know that we're involved in a number of legal cases at this moment. And God, I found out lawyers aren't cheap. Well, they are if they go out to lunch. They developed the T-Rex arms. They can't reach for the check. But paying them is something else too. The point I'm trying to make is there's only one place where that money is going to come from, and that's going to come from the unrestricted, unreserved fund. Because no matter how much we budget for the legal fees of our existing city attorney, we always have the legal fees for other things, and we're going to have it for negotiations. We're probably going to go to arbitration on a couple of them. As a matter of fact, we have one arbitration now, and we may have another one if we can't come to an agreement with the police department. So those things are coming up. You don't want to spend that fund down. And that's where this money would come from if we don't levy for it. And I can't believe I'm saying that. I mean, I hate saying it. I really do. But I don't know where we went off the tracks, but it's time to put this train back on the tracks and start managing ourselves better. That's all I have to say, and I hope that somebody has a motion. If we don't, I'll bring a deck of cards.
Question. One question.
Yeah, Mr. Rivera.
So with the cuts, what's the exact percentage to solve the problem?
So again, we're going to have a deficit in the general fund no matter what. So the 1025 is pretty steady. That fixes our debt. The cuts just reduce the general fund deficit. And I don't think anybody's pushing for any action on that. That's something we can solve internally. So the answer is 1025.
But what's the percentage?
1025.
I think it's 8.1%.
1025 would solve the debt problem.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Well, I guess the proper way to say it would fund the 2021 debt payments.
Right. Mr. Residich.
So I motion an 8.1% with the cuts, 8.1 increase with the cuts.
Say that again, please.
An 8.1% increase with the cuts.
8.1% increase with cuts. Got that, Deb? Is there a second to that motion? Okay, the chair, you good, Mr. Fire, thank you, but that's good. Any discussion? If not, roll call vote, please.
Fire,
Yes.
Paschal,
Yes.
Rosendich,
Yes.
Bargander,
No.
Wagner,
Yes.
Witzel,
Yes. It hurt.
Fisher,
No.
Spiros,
No.
Budke,
No.
Hendler.
Yes.
6-4.
To clarify. And to clarify, the motion, there's a lot of math to be done here with all the pressure. I guess I would recommend we word the motion to fund the debt, because there's a lot of variables yet. So it might be a little bit lower than 8.1.
It doesn't matter if you need 7 votes and it failed.
Okay. Okay.
And we're back. Mr. Bargender, you seem very adamant about that. Would you like to enlighten us and tell us what your feelings are?
I'm having a hard time hearing tonight, so that's why I've been pretty quiet. I have made a lot of notes here at home, writing down everything that everybody's been saying, trying to come up with a conclusion here in my mind. I know the 997 doesn't fix it. 1025 fixes it with additional cuts. Probably what we need to be looking at moving forward is one thing that has not come up in discussion in all these meetings is that we never talked about revenue sources, non-tax revenue sources. What is available to us as a city to increase our revenue? Well, I can tell you one thing we'll be talking about in closed session. I can't tell you what it is, but that's one thing for tomorrow night that we really need to talk about. The other thing is, maybe enacting a wheel tax in the future. That might be something else. I mean, I don't know all the chances we have at gaining some revenue sources, but it was brought up. I guess Steve brought it up, or Ron, real early on when we started talking about it. The mill rate 997, like Tom Bucky says, it is an unusual year to raise taxes 8.1% or whatever, as close as that as it's going to be, seems excessive in this type of economy. Now, moving forward, things are looking up. We had a lot of great news today about a vaccine. Okay, stock market just rocked today, up 800 points, I believe, at the close. Okay, so next year, if the economy can handle it, I'd go for more of a tax increase maybe next year, or something equal to what we should have this year for next year. I know Ron and Steve, they can't answer all the questions because things change every year, and our equalized value, I'd hope would go up. Maybe we can close one of the TIF districts. That would increase some of our revenue. There's just a lot of things we should still look at here. But for this year, I really don't feel comfortable supporting anything higher than 997. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Bargender, we're trying to work through a parliamentary hassle here. Hold on 1 minute. Yeah, there's I ruled as the chair that the motion failed by a 6-4 vote because a budget resolution or a budget motion takes 2/3. The question was, we weren't making the motion to forward that to the Common Council for approval. So the question is, did that just require a majority or did it require 7 votes? And Deb is working on that, and we'll stand in recess for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Okay, we're back in session. And after conferring with the city clerk on the correct parliamentary and statutory rules on it, what we were doing was making changes to a proposed budget given by the city administrator. Making changes to the proposed budget requires only a majority vote and not the 7 votes that we normally do in city council, in committee for needing a majority vote or a 2/3 majority vote for anything else. Therefore, the chair reverses the ruling and the motion made by Mr. Rosendich, I think?
Yeah.
And you will read that again, please?
The motion was to, recommend an 8.1% increase with all the recommended changes in the last 2 meetings.
Okay.
There's a
and-
6 to
hold
4.
it, I'm not done yet, and I want to be done, trust me. Okay, so essentially that motion passed by a vote of 6 to 4.
That's correct.
So that motion is adopted. And so the next thing we want to do is set the meeting date and the public hearing for the budget. And what,
November 30th.
on November 30th? Yeah, I'm looking for it. I now have screwed up all my paperwork, so.
I can say it.
Thank you. So the next item is the approval of the recommended or modified budget for publication in the city's official newspaper of consideration at the required public hearing. And this, again, according to the statutes, only requires a majority vote. The only 2/3 vote will be after the public hearing. So we need a motion to approve the recommended modified 2021 budget for publication.
I think I have an important
I'll get you-
clarification that when you get a minute. I have an important clarification when you have a minute.
Go ahead.
So, since I wasn't expecting Quentin to throw a motion in there, the 1025 rate is correct, the amount to finance our debt. But with the additional growth, the actual increase is only 7.4. I don't mean only, I mean, it's 7.4%, but the tax rate of 1025 is correct. I just misstated the increase that would be.
Okay, thank you. So the next order is the item is the approval of the modified 2021 budget for publication in the city's official newspaper. Yes.
What he's,
Okay, evidently Mr. Rosendish's motion included that, and I just need to set the date and time for Mr. Fisher.
I just need some clarification.
Oh,
So,
good.
the motion was 8.1%. Was that not stated in there? And now our finance director tells us 7.4. So are we doing a 8.1% tax increase? So we're doing more than what we need now.
Thank you.
I think Quentin's intent was to fund the debt at 1025. I misstated the planned increase, which would be 7.4. 8.1%, I assume, would still be allowable under levy limits, and that would spill into the general fund.
But my point is that it's still going to be more than what they need.
Okay. Did he say 1025 or did he say 8.1?
He said 8.1.
he said,
Okay. So do we want to, I will entertain a motion to amend his motion to 7.9, 7.4? As recommended by the finance director. They'll entertain a motion by Wetzel, second by Paschal. Discussion? No more discussion. Roll call vote, please.
Fire,
Yes.
Paschal,
Yes.
Rosendich,
Yes.
Bargander,
No.
Wagner,
Yes.
Witzel,
Yes.
Fisher,
Still no.
Spiros,
No.
Budke,
Yes.
Handler.
Yes.
Motion carried 7-3.
7-3. And now we set the time and date for the public hearing as Monday, November 30th at 6 p.m. or after the Board of Public Works meeting. Mr. Witzel.
So move.
Is there a second? Second by Mr. Paschal. Discussion. If not, roll call vote.
Fire,
Yes.
Paschal,
Yes.
Rosendich,
Yes.
Bargander,
Abstain.
Abstain. Abstain?
abstained.
The motion is to set the date as the 30th of November at 6 PM or after the Board of Public Works meeting.
Wagner,
Yes.
Witzel,
Yes.
Fisher,
Yes.
Burrows,
Yes.
Butke,
Yes.
Hendler.
Okay, that's, I think, 9-0. And with one abstention. All right, before we pack up and go, this has been a very difficult process. And for me, a personally painful process. I didn't want to do this. I think it's best for the city. I think it's what we have to do. I think if we're looking out for the future of the city, this is what we have to do. And I want to thank you all for your input and your patience tonight. Thank you very much. Mr. Bucky, you want to speak?
Please, Mr. Bard, maybe it would be good if you can get those numbers that they're looking at, and maybe Ron, at some point in time, explain why we had to do this. I think we owe it to the citizens. I mean, they're going to be, a number of them are going to be upset, but if we can explain why we had to do this to take care of the debt problem.
Okay, first, you mean the numbers from other communities, but then you also mean sort of more of an explanation of where we're at right now, why we need to take this step?
Right, and if, I don't know how the other communities, if they're as far as we are, but what they're looking at to raise and stuff, and any information you guys can provide, I think would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and I can, we've been talking about this for 2 years, but I think I can put together a pretty brief summary of bullet points of, how we got here and those kind of things that you can use when, I know I have it for when I get calls, and I assume you would want one too, so.
Okay. And with that, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Fire, second by Bucky to adjourn. All those in favor, aye. Opposed? We stand adjourned.